Hi, everybody. This is Jim Prusak, physical therapist in the Pain PT, and I'm really happy to have a special guest today, which I don't do too often. So I have Dr. Yoni Arthur here, that's known as a steady coach. And some of you guys may have known I was interviewed by her on her channel recently. So I wanted to extend the offer to her and bring her on here and ask her some questions because I think you guys are really going to learn a lot from her. So thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you
Dr.
for having
Yo.
me, Jim. Yes, thank you for having me. Our interview was awesome and I learned a lot. My audience learned a lot. So it's really cool to get to do this for you too.
Yeah, and I'm happy to sit back and ask questions this time instead of answering all of them.
Being on the
So
hot seat. Yeah.
I can just sit back here and relax and come up with some questions. Now, we'll talk back and forth, but maybe share with the audience a little bit about your background, what you do, where you came from, and then maybe transition into how you got into some of this work.
Yes. Okay. So I guess by profession, I'm an audiologist. So I've been an audiologist for almost 11 years now. And the seeds of this whole thing were planted in my second year of graduate school when I realized, oh my gosh, I'm not actually going to be able to help people this way. And I'm so sorry to the audiologists out there. Hopefully they won't come after you, Jim, with pitchforks when they hear this interview.
It might.
That's okay. We're used to it, right?
That's right.
But not to say audiologists don't help people. That's not really what I mean. But I went into audiology thinking I'm really going to be able to make a difference in people's lives. And it turned out that what I was being asked to do as an audiologist was stamp people with a diagnosis and send them on the medical conveyor belt to someone else who would give them medicine or surgery. So I would see these patients, I'd develop a relationship with them, and then I wouldn't have the tools to actually really help them transform their lives in the meaningful way that I wanted to. So just around that time, totally not coincidentally, I had my first major round of mind-body symptoms, major digestive issues. I had eczema, rashes all over my elbows and my knees, and my hair started falling out, and I had all sorts of, it was just not a fun time. I had no idea that this was mind-body. I thought it was gluten. I went on a major elimination diet. And then at the same time, I was working on this project that was letting me look into audiology a little bit further and see, okay, maybe this is meaningful. Maybe there are things I can do with audiology. And magically my symptoms went away. I thought it was the elimination diet. It wasn't the elimination diet in case anyone's wondering. So fast forward into my career, I grew more and more frustrated throughout my career, feeling like, again, I had read the room correctly when I was in graduate school, that I was not really able to help people the way I wanted to help people. And I had basically a complete meltdown and crisis a few years ago. Said, I'm not doing audiology anymore. I'm done. I'm never doing this again. And I'm going to go be a personal trainer. So I started doing that. And then my mom developed a vestibular disorder. And she was asking me questions. I opened my vestibular textbooks again. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. I guess I can help her with exercise. Okay. And then my own stress started to make sense. I was starting to work through some of my own, again, anxiety and this crisis I had about my own career. My mom was going through this thing. And somehow I started putting the pieces together. Oh my gosh, wait a second. There's more to this vestibular thing that my mom has. There's more to this vestibular stuff than what I was taught in graduate school. So I went back to school, as we do. I went to the American Institute of Balance to do a vestibular therapy training. I went through several of their trainings. And in the process of doing those trainings, I was exposed to these mind-body type of vestibular disorders that they weren't calling mind-body, they were calling them psychogenic. So triple PD, MDDS are the common diagnoses, vestibular migraine. And I just went completely down the rabbit hole. I mean, that's basically what sums it up, went completely down the rabbit hole. So this was a few years ago, and it completely reignited my passion for what I was doing. I was just like, oh my gosh, I can help people. Oh my gosh, my training matters. I can do something. I can help them. And not only can I help them, I can help them in like an incredibly meaningful, transformative way. And these people get better. I can actually heal people, not just say, oh, here, go to this doctor. Maybe he'll give you a pill. So that's when I just went all in. And as you know, from your own journey, Jim, it was a process. There were some things I wasn't willing to say on my YouTube channel a year ago that I'm definitely willing to say now. Right. But yeah, that basically sums it up. That's how I got to where I am.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, I'm listening to you and I resonate with all of that and the transition, right? And the eyes opening wide and moving away from the profession and then coming back in and being reinvigorated, the same as myself, and finding a new passion within the field. And maybe share with the audience a little bit more about vestibular disorders, because I know there's a wide variety of things you could classify under that for people who don't really understand that. Maybe give
Yeah.
some common diagnoses for people that are out there that they might be experiencing some of these symptoms that you would classify as vestibular symptoms.
Yes. Okay. So there's of course, a huge range of syndromes or conditions that can result from a vestibular problem, because the vestibular system, so kind of not exactly the same thing, but when most people think of the vestibular system, they're thinking of the balance system. And the balance system uses three senses. So it uses your eyes, your ears, and your sense of touch. So all three of those senses go into our perception of where we are in space. So again, it's not exactly balance. It's also coordination. It's where am I? It's how fast am I moving? It's where are my arms? Where are my legs? So you can already see where I'm going with this, Jim. Since there are so many senses involved in the vestibular system, we can have a potentially huge range of symptoms related to a dysfunction in that system. So I guess I'm going to classify this in two different categories, even though there's overlap. So the way I talk about vestibular conditions, there are the vestibular conditions that are caused by tissue damage. So in other words, you get a virus and it knocks out all the function in your ear and your brain's like, whoa, I can't tell where I am in space anymore. This is really bad. And you get dizzy. BPPV, so benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, which is a condition in which there's a crystal loose in the ear. Many of you know about ear crystals. We're not talking about horoscopes. We're talking about a small piece of calcium that breaks off in your inner ear. And it's moving around in your inner ear. It confuses your brain. Your ear is telling your brain you're moving, but you're not actually moving. So it's not tissue damage, but they're tissue related. They're physical conditions that cause your brain to not be getting good information about where you are in space. Okay. So those are relatively straightforward because they can be treated. So when either the physical condition itself can be treated using an exercise or some kind of medical treatment, or if it can't be treated, the brain figures things out. So the brain compensates. It's similar to a situation where, this is such a silly example, but when you wear a new pair of glasses and the first time you wear them, it's like, whoa, what's all this? Your brain figures things out. You wear bifocals for a few days, maybe a couple weeks, and it's like, okay, this is just the way it is. Now we're good. So that's basically what happens when you have some kind of physical damage or some kind of physical condition with the ear. The second category of vestibular conditions are ones that are either partly or completely medically unexplained. And what that means is either there is no sign of any kind of tissue damage or ear problem or sensory problem at all. So there doesn't seem to be a problem with the body. Or there was maybe something wrong with the body, but the brain hasn't adjusted. So it would be a situation where you put on the bifocals and you stay feeling disoriented forever, which doesn't make sense because our brain generally uses the information from our environments to make sense of things and adjust its expectations, I call them templates. It adjusts its little brain templates and it figures out what that new information means. This is neuroplasticity. For those of you who know that term, it's that process of your brain adapting to the changes in your environment. And that's our expectation. When someone has a vestibular disorder, the brain should adapt. When the brain doesn't adapt, and symptoms persist longer than, say, 3 months, we're not dealing with a physical tissue issue anymore. We're dealing with a condition in which the brain is not using information coming in correctly. It's not adapting correctly. And that latter group is a very large group of disorders, but the most common ones that I work with are triple PD, so persistent postural perceptual disorder, MDDS, mal de Debarquement syndrome, and vestibular migraine. Although, of course, many people don't even get a diagnosis because no one knows what to do with them, which is a very sad thing.
You gotta love all the complicated words, right? If you break them
yeah.
down into layman's terms, what does that mean in the body?
Yeah. It means that your body's fine. And it means that there's nothing, there are normal abnormalities in your body. I like that term. So sometimes it means maybe your ear had damage a long time ago, maybe it didn't, but otherwise your body is perfectly fine. There's no medical reason why you should be dizzy or having dizziness related symptoms. And yet your brain is not interpreting information from your senses correctly. And that leads to a perception of, I'm saying dizziness, but I have a laundry list of at least 50 different symptoms that are related to dizziness that are caused by this kind of issue.
Yeah, maybe list some of them off so the audience can get a sense of what you mean by these different symptoms.
Fun. Yes. So the most common one, of course, is dizziness. I hear a lot of rocking and swaying. So people who have that symptom all the time, or just when it's provoked by movement. Both of those are what I call neural circuits. So in other words, caused by the brain not using sensory information correctly. Floating, a sense of disorientation, head heaviness, pressure, feeling like you're walking on a trampoline, sometimes spinning, like a sensation of spinning, although that's a little less common. I do see that. Feeling like your legs are heavy or you're not sure where they are, feeling like you can't look at visual patterns like carpets or blinds or garage doors without feeling really off, feeling like you can't track things that are moving, feeling like you can't focus on something, whether it's moving or not, feeling light sensitivity. I've seen people with situations like visual snow, where they have kind of, again, a visual snow in their field of vision, feeling like you are just kind of generally off, like there's just something off about your body and you can't really put your finger down on it. Again, that often occurs with people with this kind of condition. Gosh, I could probably list off 50 others, but those are the most common ones.
Yeah, the most common ones. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people, they hear these words, these technical words, and they, well, what does that mean to me and in my body?
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that these are normal abnormalities, just like we see in the spine and other parts of the body.
Mm-hmm.
And then you mentioned this is a brain coming more from the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe let's transition into that now, because that's the interesting part, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is so when we're talking about the brain and these conditions, what are you talking about for these people? What is going on then that's creating potentially or causing these symptoms?
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to start talking about danger mode. And I know that your audience is probably very familiar with this concept. How do you refer to it, Jim? Do you call it danger mode or alarm mode? You call it anxiety?
Danger, perceived danger,
Mm-hmm.
Alarm, false alarm, depending.
Yeah.
Not really real, or if it's anxiety, but yeah, some type
Yeah.
of alarm or danger.
Yeah. Okay. So our brains don't just respond to our environments. They predict things. Our brains always predict things. And this is great, because if they just kind of let you learn every time, you'd get hurt a lot. So the example I often give is hot stove. You don't have to do it more than once. You don't have to touch the hot stove more than once to learn, wow, probably shouldn't do that. This is great. So in other words, the next time you come across a hot stove, your brain's like, no, that's dangerous. Don't do that. You don't do it again. Okay. So our brain is constantly predicting danger in our environments, and it's constantly adjusting those messages based on situations or issues or other things that have happened to us in our daily lives. Let's just leave it at that. Okay. So the problem is that sometimes the brain doesn't always understand danger accurately. So sometimes, especially when the brain is already kind of in this situation where it's already predisposed to thinking that things are dangerous, and I'll give you examples in a moment, it can start to assume something's dangerous and make predictions that that thing is dangerous, even when it's not dangerous at all. Okay. So this is something I see happen with patients all the time. BPPV, one of the conditions I mentioned earlier, the crystals in the ear. In my clinical practice, when I was working in a regular clinical practice, I would see people with BPPV all the time. And you fix the crystal and off they dance into the sunset and they have no problems anymore and everything's fine. Okay. A small subset of people, the brain freaks out. BPPV happens. The spinning stops. You get the crystal out of the way. The sensations persist. The person still feels really off and really dizzy. And it's not because the crystal in the ear is still there. It's not because there's a physical cause to the symptoms anymore. It's because the brain now, even though the actual physical cause of the problem is gone, it's still predicting that movement is going to bring on symptoms. So it makes symptoms happen. It's kind of a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay.
Right.
And we've seen this again in studies on pain, that people's expectations of what might be painful can cause pain. So the story of two nails, I'm sure you've told this story on your channel many times. So tiny short recap for those who haven't heard it. Construction worker, nail went through his boot. Oh my God, horrible pain, taken to the hospital, put on all sorts of painkillers. They cut the boot away and the nail had gone between two of his toes. He had real pain. His brain predicted pain, but it predicted wrong. So what's happening with a chronic dizziness issue is the brain is predicting wrong. It's predicting danger when there isn't any. It's predicting that this sensory information is a problem when it isn't. And that produces the sensations of dizziness.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, it's a small subset, but like chronic pain too is what, 20-25% of the population.
Still a large number.
30. So a really large number of people. And so why is it, in your opinion, why is it that percentage, that in that population that happens? What are the ingredients, or why is it happening to those people, but not other people?
Hope you're ready for a soapbox, Jim. Okay.
I asked a loaded question there.
Yeah, I love this question. Okay. So first thing, I think that I'm going to kind of divide this into two components. There are external factors and there are internal factors. So I'm going to talk about the external factors first because I just have to go on my soapbox. So why does this happen to people with dizziness? Because there's a mystique around vestibular disorders. There are not many physicians who know how to correctly treat and diagnose them. And there is an insistence on using a biomedical treatment approach that does not take into account that person's other experiences. I talk on my channel a lot about psychosocial components, and I'll go into that in the internal factors discussion in a second. But in other words, if I want to just boil it down, these people are scared to death. They go to a doctor who says, oh, you're having a stroke and a heart attack. And then they don't find anything. And they're like, well, you have an irreversible neurological condition and you're never going to get better. Goodbye. Here's an SSRI. Who wouldn't go into a cycle of danger mode after hearing a message like that? No matter what your background is, doesn't matter. If you hear a message like that, especially from a trusted person, a trusted authority like a doctor, how could you not end up in danger mode and have your brain like way overreactive, way sensitive to any sensation that's off? So I think that's a huge factor. And not to say that people with chronic pain don't go through similar processes, but because I think vestibular disorders may be a little bit less prevalent and there are fewer professionals who are qualified to treat and diagnose them, I think that people with these kinds of symptoms often get even more scared because there really is very little information available to them. So that's the external factor that I had to talk about. So internal factors, what else leads someone to be in danger mode? Well, again, I know you talk about this a lot on your channel, but there's a whole host of things. And some of those things are just simply, you can simply qualify them as stress. So just going through stressful life experiences puts your brain in kind of a hyper alert state. So whether that means you just had a big life transition, you just lost someone you love, you're dealing with conflicts, you're dealing with, again, even something very happy that's happening in your life, getting married, having a child, it's stressful. It makes your brain much more likely to make mistakes, much more likely to err on the side of caution, to be in danger mode, to take a danger perspective on a sensation rather than saying, oh, everything's fine. So stress alone plays a role here. But I think that some people are more prone to the stress affecting them deeply on the inside. And I don't mean that in a, oh, you're weak, so you can't handle stress kind of way. No, on the contrary, it tends to be the people who are the strongest people, the people who are most likely to put on a face and bravely go forward and take care of things and be responsible. They store all that stress inside. They brush it off. They don't necessarily stop and take care of themselves. Again, not in a blaming way. I'm just saying they're used to being so strong. They just don't think about it. And all that stress, all those emotions build up inside, and they again cause the brain to be in this perpetual state of danger mode, perpetual state of predicting danger. And when you pair some kind of sensation, like a dizziness sensation that happened for whatever reason, whether there was a disorder or not. Jim, do you get dizzy sometimes? I do. Sometimes I spin for no reason. There's just, our
Yeah.
brains are weird, our bodies are weird, stuff
And all
happens.
sorts of weird stuff. I've had some of the weirdest stuff ever. If I didn't know this, how it works, I would freak out. Like you said, I would think of it as
Yes.
being dangerous.
Yes. So these sensations are often normal, not to say the degree to which people are experiencing them is normal. It's a horrible, horrible, horrible thing to go through. But the sensation, I talk about a volume dial in the brain. When the brain's in danger mode, you're dealing with stress. You can't talk about your feelings. You're also a perfectionist. You're putting a lot of pressure on yourself, not to mention trauma. We haven't even gone there. All
Right.
of those things make your brain turn the volume dial up on any perceived danger. And if that perceived danger is a kind of a like a weird dizziness sensation that many people have experienced, in that state, it can turn the volume dial way up on it and keep it going. It's going to keep it going again because it thinks it's dangerous. It's trying to bring it to your attention.
Yeah. And another word for that is sensitization, right?
Yes,
Central
exactly.
sensitization in the literature. Yeah. And then you think, like you said, you go to well-meaning physicians and doctors, and they're dialing up the danger signal as well, unknowingly sometimes just by giving the diagnoses and not reassuring the
Yes.
patient. So
Yes.
then you just add that to the mix as well as everything else you mentioned.
Yes, and I was one of those clinicians. And that's why I think I feel so passionately about saying something about that. And again, I've been one of them. I know how well-meaning these medical professionals are. It's not that anyone wants to hurt someone. It's that we're not often trained, we're not often aware of these other factors. And then it's kind of time consuming in a clinical situation to sit down with someone and say, what was going on in your life when this all started? Like what
Yeah.
you got that dizzy sensation, that's fine. But what was going on in your life at the time? What might have turned the volume dial up? What might have put your brain in danger mode? That's not that's not a 5-minute office visit. You have to get
No.
to know someone. You have to talk things over. And unfortunately, in in the way at least medicine is practiced in this country, but I work with people around the world, so I unfortunately it seems quite similar in many places.
Yeah.
This is the reality of the 5 to 10 minute office visit. People don't go into this stuff.
They don't. And there's another piece too, I think, on the practitioner side, because we see this, like we did some training with this emotional awareness and expression training, right? The
Yeah.
comfortability of the practitioner to go to the emotional side or to the stress side to ask those questions, they might not be feeling very comfortable about it. I know my work, my as a physical therapist, I mean, physical therapists, they start squirming in their seats when you start talking about
Yeah.
emotions and stress. They don't want to talk about that.
Right. Well, and then you add on to the fact again, if we are assuming it's not just discomfort because it's something we're unfamiliar with, it's also we want to be very sensitive to making sure our patients don't feel like we're blaming them or saying it's all in your head. And this is probably one of the biggest misconceptions that I deal with, because there's a whole subset of my clients who, a doctor brought up, hey, this is just anxiety. They'll just say, oh, it's just anxiety, and then the patient then feels like, wow, it's my fault. I'm anxious and this is out of my hands and this is something I can't control. And now I just got to take a bunch of anti-anxiety medication. That's the only way out of this. So it is very important for me to communicate this, or for anyone speaking with these clients to communicate it in a way that is empowering and tells them, listen, all pain, all dizziness is in your head. It's all about how the brain perceives things, whether you have a bleeding cut in your arm or there's a nail that went through your boot that didn't touch your skin. It's the same pain. Whether you have a vestibular problem from neuritis or you have chronic dizziness, it's the same dizziness. It's just as real, whether it's generated by a nervous system issue as it is if it was generated by a physical issue. So it's not about it being real or, oh, it's just anxiety, go take a pill. It's the same thing. The good news is when we have to differentiate them, because if it's a nervous system issue that's caused by stress, if we address the stress, the brain can adjust and then we can stop having symptoms.
Yeah, that's right. And that's it. The key is that you're moving towards the stress, not the structure in your treatment, right? So maybe talk a little more about that in terms of what you do with people, because like you said, your practice is way different now.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you work with people to help them overcome these symptoms?
Lots of exercises. No, I'm kidding. Actually, no, like none. People, I think when people first meet with me, they know I'm a vestibular therapist and they say, aren't you going to give me some exercises? And I'm like, nope. We're going to talk about your feelings.
I'm the same way now too. I go, you want exercise? Go for a walk. Go do something you want to do. There's no particular exercise you need from me.
Right.
Other than to get active again.
Exactly. Yes. And I mean, from a vestibular perspective, go like walking, looking at things around you, like you can't get better vestibular stimulation than that. So yeah. So the first question I ask people is, what was going on in your life when this all started? Because there's I don't know that I've ever met someone that made me say, wow, everything was great. And this all just started out of the blue. I would say there are probably two subsets of people. There's one for whom the initial event scared the living daylights out of them, and then they went to a physician and that just became a thing. So it wasn't so much that there was so much life stress going on at the time. It's that the symptoms themselves were really scary at first, and then they got stuck in this cycle of fear and anxiety because of the messages they were given. For that subset of people, it's actually usually really, really quick and easy to get out of it. They get the right information. You give them some techniques for calming themselves down and understanding that this is just, again, a normal brain adaptation. There's nothing wrong with your body, and they tend to get better. But the vast majority of people have something else going on. There was something else going on in their lives at the time. There's a reason the brain was in danger mode in the first place. This isn't just an out of the blue situation. And once we look at what was going on in their lives, that tells me a lot about what issues we might need to work on. And again, for some people, it's relatively straightforward, actionable, like, hey, so you hate your job and clearly you don't want to be in your job anymore. So what do we want to do about that? Right. So for some people, it's that, it's relatively straightforward.
Change.
But
yeah.
Sometimes it's just change on the outside. Sometimes it's change in perspective.
That's right.
But for many people who've gone through difficult experiences, it's about untangling some of these internal patterns of reaction to stress. That's really where the change needs to come from. So the example I often give for this is, if you have two people with exactly the same job, they're both, say they're doing something like database management. Okay. They both have the same job. And one of them had not so great of a childhood. Dad was kind of a jerk. He yelled a lot. There was just not a happy home life. And then the second one perfectly happy, just kind of your average, nothing really happened there. Okay. Let's just say the boss yells at both of them, these two identical people with the same job. They're going to have very different internal reactions. Now, does that mean they're going to have the same different reactions on the outside? No. Most people, with exceptions, most people know when my boss yells at me, it's probably not helpful for me to fly into a rage or break down into tears. So they're probably both going to be like, wow, okay, thanks for the feedback. I'll work on that. Okay. Probably on the outside, both of them are going to react that way. But on the inside, someone who's had a long history of not being treated well and having to hold back feelings, that person is going to react in a much stronger way on the inside, maybe even outside of his or her conscious awareness. And that is stress too. So when I say stress, when I was referring to stress earlier, I don't just mean, oh, you got married or you had a new baby or you bought a new house. It can also be stress on the inside that's occurring chronically because of the way that your mind has been programmed over the years to respond to things on the outside.
Yeah. And I think that's important. The link to the past, the present trigger can have links to the past, to the patterns in the upbringing, right? Back to childhood and that person.
So much. And it's not always traumatic. So some of my favorite clients have been people who had relatively good childhoods, but they sometimes have kind of an inborn desire to be very conscientious or be very perfectionistic or to help people. They were born particularly sensitive, kind people. And then add a little bit of dysfunction in the family, add a little bit of, I'm one of several children and I end up with this particular set of responsibilities on me. And you can, again, have a recipe for someone getting into a state of constantly needing to repress or suppress feelings and reactions, which again can be very, very stressful, especially when you're doing it over a long period of time and in the context of other stress on the outside.
Yeah. I don't know about you, maybe you speak to this. I always tell my patients, I said, I feel like I'm talking to the same person, but with a different head in different circumstances. But I swear this is the same principles. Like I was like, God, Dr. Sarno was really right. I'm like, it's the same person in the same story or theme over and over and over again. At least what I see. So I don't know if that resonates to you.
Yeah.
Maybe you can even tell me what you think that is.
Yeah.
Because it seems to be occurring over and over again in the people I see.
Yes. And I'll say that I'll speak to the average dizzy person that I see. But then I'll also say that, of course, there are some very clear exceptions and they have stories that still make sense. Once you dig in, it makes sense. But I always say, so I have a membership community where I have it's a small membership community, but I have a group of us, a group of people with chronic dizziness who are all recovering together. And I always say, jerks don't get dizzy. That's why this is the nicest membership community in the entire world. You guys are so nice, so supportive.
The same thing, right?
Oh my gosh. Like I don't have to moderate anything. They're just the nicest people. And I'm like, this is not an accident, guys. This is not an accident. I don't use the word jerks. I use other words, but in other words, people who are jerks typically don't get dizzy.
That's right.
I've met a few exceptions, but very few.
Very few. Yeah. I always said we should replace the M and TMS to N, too nice syndrome.
Yes.
And, but like you said, I love working with these people because they're such awesome people. They're such good people.
They're such good people. They're the most conscientious, successful, and they tend to be really smart too. That's the other thing. I always say, dumb jerks don't get dizzy. If you're here, you're probably smart. Sorry to break it to you, because it seems to me that they tend to be conscientious analyzers. They're deep thinkers, deep feelers. They're really conscientious, worrying about other people, taking care of other people, kind, caring. Again, If you are a jerk and you're dumb and you're not kind and caring, you can still be chronically dizzy. So don't rule yourself out if you're one of those people. But chances are you're not. The chances are you fall into that category.
Category. I always say it's like, I tell people, look, it's overdoing, right? It's over caring, it's over trying, overachieving, over everything, because the making up for what maybe you didn't get, right? Or the support.
Right. And that's I get really curious. And again, I see so many people who are so kind. I get curious all the time. But when someone says, it's just the way I am, I just can't help it. I had to be the one to take care of my mom. I get really curious about that. I want to know a little more about what that means, because while it makes sense to take care of someone, I've never questioned someone like, you're going to take care of your loved ones, of course, but people do. They take it to extremes. They don't take care of themselves. And some of it is circumstantial, but there's always an interplay between our circumstances and our past, our backgrounds. And I get really curious about people's backgrounds when I hear this, because
Yeah.
to me, like you're saying, it speaks to some kind of, it's almost a protective mechanism. It's, I'm caring because I can't tolerate the alternative. What's the alternative? What if you didn't take care of that person? What would that mean? What are you afraid would happen if you didn't? Well, I just couldn't. It's just not who I am. Well, tell me more about who you are. Tell me more about this uncaring person. What would have happened to that person as a child? What would have happened to that person in other points in your life? That really starts to help us again unravel some of these patterns.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like, everything you say rings true. And it's this overdoing to make up for something, and actually trying to get the love and affirmation and support we need by putting so much into the other person. Yet we can just come back and say, let's give that to ourselves instead of trying so hard to get it from somebody else.
Yes. And that is so hard for these
folks. Yeah, because that's going against
hard.
The pattern, because the person didn't get it as much as maybe they needed as a child, and right, they're still looking for it, and through people pleasing and being so nice, but realizing it's like, God, that's a lot of work and a lot of effort expended to get that little bit back, right? And it builds a ton of stress internally.
So much. But this is why I think these groups that you and I know you have a group now, I have a group now. Sometimes those groups are really corrective, because I can point out just how stark the contrast is between how they're treating other people and how they treat themselves. And these are people who, again, they identify with very, very closely, because they're dealing with the same conditions. They're right here in the same group with me. We're talking about the same situation. And then, well, I can't be angry at my mom because she did the best she could. Right. And then someone else in that group, same condition, same situation. Well, that doesn't make sense. She did you wrong. Like, you should be able to be angry with her. So again, I feel like some of these groups also are beautiful corrective experiences, because they can allow us to see ourselves really, truly reflected in someone else who's having such a similar experience, and see, wow, this is something I could say the same exact words to myself. I am the same as this person.
Right. And to recognize, that all these emotions, right, we're talking about now, our emotions, they're all human, normal emotions. And I don't know about you, but I find that anger is probably one of the biggest ones that people have a bad relationship with.
Yes.
Have the most difficulty with. Maybe share a little bit more about that.
Yeah. And again, there are some exceptions. So I've spoken about this a lot on my channel, and I get comments. I read all the comments. So I get comments sometimes. I'm very angry. I'm a very angry, assertive person. This is not my problem. Okay. So if that's you, that's cool. It doesn't mean that's the only factor. There are plenty of other reasons.
It doesn't mean it's the only one, of course.
Right. But by and large, there's an unwillingness to feel anger. And I tell people, I recently said this, and one of my community members wrote it down for me, because she's like, that was so good. And I'm like, wow, that really was good. I have to remember how I said that, because that was one of my moments. It comes out of
your mouth. It's like
wow.
I can't believe I just said that.
Yeah, that was so good. Right? But it was something to the effect of, anger is a very useful data point because anger is a boundary setting emotion. If we are not able to feel anger, we can never feel safe because we don't know when our boundaries are being crossed. So one of the common things that I hear from people who, again, they're not really sure who they should be angry at. They're like, I don't know. I don't know if I really have anger. A lot of times what I hear from them first is, I don't feel safe in my body. And they'll blame the symptoms. And I just want to say, if you're suffering from chronic dizziness or chronic pain or any of these other chronic conditions, of course you don't feel safe in your body. I know the symptoms are awful. I know they're awful, and I know it makes you feel 1,000 times worse. But when I dig into this with people, that feeling predated the chronic symptoms. The feeling of not feeling safe in one's body predated those chronic symptoms. Again, if that's one of the things you're experiencing. So what I mean to say with all this is, anger is one of the most useful emotions that we have, because it allows us to see when our boundaries have been crossed. It allows us to feel safe. And it's demonized. It's demonized because people associate anger with outbursts. And when you and I refer to anger, we're not referring to like, okay, just go like yell at everyone and be super mad all the time and hold on to anger and, just go be a super angry, bitter person. That's not what we're getting at. What we're getting at is, if you're not able to feel anger when it arises in your body in response to whatever interpersonal situation it is, you're not able to see that your needs are not being met. You're not able to see that your boundaries are being crossed. And again, that's stressful. And keeping that anger down, like pushing it down in your subconscious mind, if you want to think about it that way, that's stressful too. And every time danger comes up, your brain's going to say, holy crap, there's that dangerous feeling again. Got to push that down. And that's danger also.
That's right.
So
yeah.
it's like, it's a big mess. But why is anger so demonized? I think it's people associate it with being a jerk. And that's not what anger is. It's just a data point. It's just a signal from your brain that something is not right. And what you decide to do with it ultimately determines whether you're a jerk or not. But also, I think there's a cultural thing. There's a cultural pressure to just be happy. We love positive emotions. We love dividing emotions up into the good ones and the bad ones, especially in Western culture. And I know not everyone who watches your channel is in the United States or in Europe or in Canada or any of these other countries that may follow this Western culture. But I think this is true in many cultures. We love positive feelings. We love positive emotions, and we like to make the bad ones go away. And our job, we think is our job, is to, when we have a difficult experience, when we're feeling sadness, when we're feeling grief, when we're feeling anger, well, we want to get rid of them as quickly as possible. We're not comfortable being with them. And again, this is perpetuated not just by our culture, but also by parenting, and sometimes also by very difficult experiences as a child. In the end, you end up with so many reasons why you wouldn't want to feel anger or you wouldn't want to feel grief. And you end up in the situation that I just described: inability to set boundaries, inability to recognize your own needs, inability to feel safe.
Yeah. You said it really, really well. And I think that anger is such a strong emotion. It needs some expression, right? It's like, you think of being bottled up. And I always think there's two extremes. People think of anger, either am I going to explode? And so they don't want to do that. So instead they implode on the inside, right? With symptoms.
Yeah.
But there's such a large amount of space between exploding and imploding to work with that emotion. Like you're alluding to, things you could do, action steps you can take, boundaries, saying no, standing up for yourself, on and on and on.
Yes. Or even just being willing to feel it. I mean, in the first place.
Or just be willing to exactly acknowledge that you have. I can't tell you how many people, you probably hear the same thing, where we're talking and I'm going, God, I'm getting angry. I'm getting mad for them. I'm like, God, I want to kill that person. What the? Are you angry? No, I'm not really angry. I feel bad. What? So it's like, it's so missed, right? It's so missed.
Right. And again, there's this stigma, like, if I have anger, I'm an angry person. Or if I have anger, I'm a bad person. Or I can't be mad at people I love because it pushes them away. And this is something we talked about in that course we recently attended together, which was so great: emotional awareness and expression. there are push feelings and there are pull feelings. So there are feelings that disconnect us from people, that set boundaries, that push them away, that stand up for us. So frustration, resentment, anger, those are all push away feelings. And then there are pull toward feelings that speak to
Mm,
our needs for attachment, for safety, for intimacy, love, grief, sadness. Those are pull toward feelings.
right.
And again, those aren't necessarily positive or negative feelings like I was talking about at the beginning. These are push pull feelings. So many of the people I work with are comfortable with pull feelings and not comfortable with push feelings
Mm,
because they have past wounds, past experiences related to not getting their needs met, especially needs for caring, love, and attachment. So, again, now we're starting to get into some of the traumas, some of the traumatic experiences that can cause people to develop these symptoms later on in life. But even without a traumatic experience, if someone did not have those needs met, if there was an insecure attachment, if there were difficulties feeling like you got enough of attention and caring, you're going to be averse to any of the feelings that cause you to push people away. And that means, again, you're not able to access your full range of emotions. You're not able to access your boundaries.
yeah. Oh, that's well said. Yeah, and people put that anger, instead of being able to work with it, they put it back into themselves.
Mhm.
So it's
They
there, but
do.
it's just they blame themselves and right lead to those internal feelings of anger getting stronger on the
They
inside.
do. They do. I
Yeah.
see so much of that. So many internal critics, so much blame, so much
Mm,
shame, so much guilt. And I mean, I feel like those are often the drivers, but people don't realize underneath that what it is, that really beneath the guilt, the shame, the self-blame is anger and a legitimate need for boundaries and for needs to be met.
yeah, yeah, well said. So, and a little bit of time we have left. I mean, this we could
Mhm.
talk for hours, right? We could
Yeah,
go
we
on.
could.
I'll
Yeah.
forget about my next patient. We'll be talking for another hour, but just to like bring it all together, we kind of talked a lot about we went from the physical right into more of the psychological and into really this emotional world.
Mhm.
Maybe sum up for the audience what you think are some of the most important things people need to look for in themselves, things they need to maybe practice or be
Mhm.
attentive to if they want to take this approach in their healing.
Yeah, I think the most important, the biggest piece is the education part. So watch Jim's channel, watch your channel, watch my channel, read the books. I'm sure you've recommended the books by Sarno, by Dr. Schubiner, by Alan Gordon. So those, again, just getting the information is step one. But in keeping with our incredibly analytical, perfectionistic high achievers, at some point you already have the information. You don't need more information. You already get it. You already know what you're dealing with as a neural circuit problem. So then it's time to look inside and figure out what these patterns are. And I think that this is very difficult to do by yourself. I think you can, one option is to journal. So if you have to do this by yourself, Dr. Schubiner's book again, Unlearn Your Pain. I'm sure you've talked about it. There are some journaling
Mhm.
prompts in there that can kind of help you start to feel feelings, ultimately feel feelings and dig into your stressors. But again, this can be very difficult to do on your own. And this is where either working with a friend or a professional, someone with experience with mind body disorders, can be really, really helpful and very efficient often. It's not usually, you don't usually see people for 3 years. This is usually a
Yeah.
relatively short term endeavor because people, not always, but many people feel better relatively quickly on the order of weeks or months. I mean, I'm assuming that's your experience too, Jim.
Yeah, it varies. Could be short, could be longer,
Hmm.
weeks to up to a year. I've had the most, I think the longest person I've seen was maybe 18 months.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Yeah,
again, depends on the person's history and
right.
what they're going through.
Right, right. But there's again, there's something about being seen and having someone who knows what to look for that can be really helpful. But I understand, I mean, not everyone can do that. And that's why we have YouTube channels, because not everyone can access that. That's something I'm very passionate about. I have a course that's completely free. That's for anyone who's suffering from chronic dizziness or any kind of related chronic issue. It's specifically for dizziness, but if you have chronic pain and want to take it, you're totally welcome to. And Jim, I can send you the link so you can put it in the
Please do.
interview
I'll put it on
description.
the YouTube notes.
Yeah. It's completely free. And I'm actually just about to update it in January with a brand new section on emotions to help people do this on their own if they can't do this with a professional. What you can do to start is take an honest look at yourself. If this is resonating with you, if you say, gosh, I do have some of those personality traits. Wow, I guess some of these situations I've been in have been kind of stressful for me because I'm not able to feel my feelings. Just giving yourself permission, even in the moment, to feel your feelings is an enormous step in the right direction. So I've heard someone else in the mind body community talk about it, taking a 3-dimensional approach: emotional, physical, mental. So the mental approach is learn what you're doing right now. The physical is realize that you're holding tension in your body and learning to relax your body. So having some kind of relaxation practice, whatever that is. It doesn't need to be meditation. It can be anything that you enjoy and helps you relax. And then the third thing, feeling your feelings, even just in the moment, even just acknowledging them, even having a way to just write down what you're feeling, not focusing on symptoms, but the relationships, the stressors that have got you into this situation in the first place.
Yeah, I love that too. I think of it that way too, those 3 categories, because I think it's a nice way to break it down, to look at the different components of the brain components. But yeah, that's awesome. So I'm going to put your information down if people have questions for you, or they have symptoms they want to address with you. You do individual consulting as well, right? As well as
I do. Currently there's a waiting list. So I have encouraged people to consider instead joining my group, because it's an ongoing open group, so people can join and just come right on in. And that's the best way to get face-to-face time with me quickly. But I respond to YouTube comments. I read them all and I respond to them. So if you leave a comment, if you have a question, I'll answer it. And if it's something that I can't answer in a YouTube comment, I'll tell you that. And you can consider joining the coaching or even just joining the membership community. I do Q&As on there every week.
Okay. And where do they find you?
Yeah. So the easiest way is through my website, thesteadycoach.com, and on my YouTube channel, which is, I guess you could just search YouTube for The Steady Coach, but it's youtube.com/@thesteadycoach.
The Steady Coach. Okay, great. I think this is awesome. I'm really happy that I had you on, and you shared a lot of gems, a lot of great information today.
Awesome.
And I love listening to you, because for me, it's like a reflection of things that I know, but we all say in a different way. So I really glean stuff from you. It's like different angles of the same thing, but it's beautiful to hear that. So
it is. It's affirming for us also. Like we're going against the grain a little bit, so it's really good to, oh God, I'm not the only one, thank goodness. But also Daniel Lyman says we're a community of people stealing each other's metaphors. So I love people in the mind body community give me good material. I'm like, oh, I'm totally stealing that and using that with everyone.
Yeah, and it's just like, it's for it hits people the right way. That's why there's different coaches for different people, right? It's what resonates for them. So thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I think the readers are going to get a lot out of this, or the listeners, I should say. And again, if they have questions, they can find you, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon. So
Jim, thanks for having me. This was such a pleasure. Thank you. Again, like you're saying, we could go on for hours and hours. So I really appreciate coming on.
Okay. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye, Jim.
Bye.